We have very few minutes for questions and even less for answers from our panel. The intent of this session today was to educate us. And educational, I'm sure it was. That, I think, was a very deep and thoughtful set of lectures. You're welcome to ask. There are microphones around. 1, 2, 3. We just start here. Very brief questions, please. We want to get all questions in, and then we will have virtually no time for answers. Feel free to comment also and to challenge. John.
Not just... Can you hear me?
Go ahead, yes.
Not so much a question, but a quick point of clarification. I thought all three talks set, a very emotionally and historically charged set of issues in front of us in a very, very calm way, and that while there wasn't explicit accusations of wrongdoing either on behalf of the industrial polluters or the UN negotiators, who really haven't opened up the benefits of international offset trading for poor people, and yet there's a disconnect here. And I just wanted to make the point that it is not impossible to measure land use change on very, very small parcels with the sufficient degree of with the same degree of accuracy at the same cost as large aggregated plantations. That's just a falsehood, and it's a falsehood that's kind of been perpetuated in the negotiation process, partly because of the absence of my country, where that technology has been fine-tuned to benefit U.S. farmers for their WTO compliant green conservation credit subsidies. And now, of course, some European countries are catching up on that technology, and great efforts are being made, particularly by India and China, to make some of it available to developing countries, Brazil as well.
So we only have 1 minute questions per minute.
But it is not impossible for small parcels here and there to be aggregated into a tradable aggregation, just like these larger holdings that are being brought up by the elites that were mentioned.
Thank you. Reach forward. Don't switch it off.
Okay,
I'm sorry. He wants to save energy. Go ahead.
I'm Judy Oglethorpe from the World Wildlife Fund. Is this on?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to sort of make a comment on a question. Thank you very much for these presentations. I think it was great to have the diversity and range. They were all excellent and very thought-provoking presentations. I'd like to make the point that, when adaptation is promoted, we have to be careful not just to do adaptation that works in the short term, but actually causes more problems in the long term. We need to make sure that adaptation is going to be sustainable and that it can be done in a way that's harmonious with the environment, because otherwise we may just be creating more and more problems for the future. So I wondered if the panelists had any comments on, looking at how agricultural adaptation can be done in a way that fits in with ecosystem adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin?
Thank you, Joaquin. I think that the three presentations said many interesting things, but I want to point two. One is that mitigation and adaptation both will cost a lot of money. And secondly, that you can look at it from very different perspectives. And the three presentators come from different places and had very different views. And with that, in that context, I want to ask Camila if she could elaborate a little bit of who would manage those funds. You said we need to get a lot of money together, and those monies can be managed in different ways. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Okay. Raj, did you have your hand up, or there was one other here? Okay, in the middle there. reach backwards. Introduce yourself, and that will be, I'm afraid, the last comment on this, unless there's somebody very urgently. Well, okay, one urgent.
I'll keep it a very quick question. My name's Jen. I'm from the Foundation for Environmental Security. And my question is, you mentioned a bit about the differences, how urban areas and rural areas are affected by climate change, but you didn't mention gender-specific programs that you are working on in your respective NGOs, and I'd be very interested to hear what those are.
Okay. Sir, you are last.
Yeah, my name is Clive Mutunga from Population Action International.
Speak loud, we hear you.
Yeah, Clive Mutunga from Population Action International. I have a question on NAPA implementation. That's the National Adaptation Programs of Action, which LDCs were supposed to identify their urgent and priority adaptation actions. A number of countries, 41 to date, have submitted their NAPAs, but none of the projects are as yet been implemented. So I wanted to get the take of the panelists on the issue of NAPAs. Thank you.
Okay. Panelists, you have a minute each. Mahbub, feel free also to comment on your colleagues. You go first. No. Did you not want to pick up any of these? It's fine. Then, yeah. You're permitted to speak less than 1 minute. Yeah.
I think the question about the gender is very much important, because when we see these problems come in, it's the impact is much more on women than men, particularly for the livelihoods, the health impact, and all that. So, in the interventions that we think of or think of implementing, obviously gender should come in prominently into those. So it's a good question.
Thank you. Raul, did you have a comment?
Well, in the Bali Action Plan, there is a phrase they call a common but differentiated responsibilities with respect to climate change, and I think this is one of the crucial issues that has to be translated into rules. What it means is those who have been most responsible for the climate change problem have more responsibility in terms of addressing it, and also in helping those who have been sort of affected by it in terms of mitigation and adaptation. So I think that still has to be resolved, how to share the responsibility. And then just a second point, I have heard a lot about the U.S. system, and I could see the usefulness of that system in small countries and developing countries. The problem is that system will not be accredited by Kyoto under the current rules of accreditation for carbon trade. I don't think it will pass the rules. So we have to make an effort to translate those simple systems into systems that can be internationally recognized.
Thank you. Camilla, you have the last word.
Okay, well, on the question of whether or not you can satisfactorily measure carbon in soils, I mean, I don't think that's the issue so much. I think it's that with all markets, you tend to find that small producers get squeezed out unless they can find ways of aggregating and overcoming the transaction costs involved. You know, whether it's carbon markets, whether it's green beans, whether it's milk, small producers need to gather together in order to have the combined mass, either through cooperatives or farmer associations, organizations like that Raul's involved in order to gain access to markets. The long-term option question, our friend from WWF, I guess it really all depends how good we are at cutting back sufficiently fast. I mean, some of the projections for temperature levels, if we fail to mitigate hard enough, would really mean that adaptation becomes a joke, really. I mean, just not feasible. In terms of funds, who will manage them? Well, as you probably know, there's a pretty active competition at the moment to be the world's leading climate change fund manager, and people just round the corner are certainly pitching themselves to be in that position, but there's some question as to whether or not that would be the view of the UNFCCC, given worries about governance issues, worries about the extent to which countries that have been affected by climate change would have their funds managed by countries who are primarily responsible for creating the problem in the first place. Little sort of difficulties of that sort. But the jury is very much out on how the funds will be managed at the moment, but there are likely to be a whole number of parallel channels. You're quite right, we didn't mention gender at all. I apologise for that. If I'd had a bit more time, I would have. But clearly, if you look at the impacts of disasters, the tsunami, many of the cyclones hitting Bangladesh, women tend to be way disproportionately more affected by those disasters. Equally, since women tend to be the ones who go and fetch the water, again, when water becomes scarcer and more difficult, that impacts on them, on their health, and that of their daughters' capacity to go to school, and a whole cycle of continued vulnerability and deprivation. On the nappers, yeah, it's pretty shocking, isn't it, that they put together these nappers and none of them have been picked up as yet. I think Bhutan is, in fact, has a napper that's now starting to be funded, but it makes the developed countries' commitment to adaptation look pretty thin, the fact that these nappers have now been in existence for a number of years and none of those projects have been taken up.